So when I was first naming characters in my book, I made the huge mistake of also looking up baby shower gift ideas at the same time I was looking up names. And now it's years later, and Google thinks I have a 5-year-old, and I am constantly getting ads for my non-existent 5-year-old. And the ads are bright and shiny with toys in them, and I am not helping that problem. I can't help with the targeted ads you'll get when you look up character names, but I can help you find inspiration. Results may or may not be actually helpful. Anyway, here are 10 do's and don'ts in coming up with names for your characters. This is Aang, and this is Wazoo Pipsempalopsicopoulos III, and he is one of only 2 characters in Avatar The Last Airbender with a last name. The other one is Beifong, and that's important. By giving last names sparingly, it tells us a lot about the world, and it shows off importance for the people who do have last names. How notorious do you have to be to get a last name? Seriously, even the Fire Lord doesn't have a last name. Hell, the Earth King doesn't even get a name. But at the same time, they don't need extra names because they're the Fire Lord and the Earth King. They're important enough to be referred to as the. And you want to consider how many names your characters get. Are you writing a story where there are characters important enough to get a last name or not get a last name? Who gets a middle name? How do we find out they have a middle name? Or do they get 2 first names? And what do their last names say about them? Is their wider family important? Or is it a sign of respect referring to a character by only their last name? Or is that a part of the world building? In some Asian countries like Japan, people are usually referred to by their last names, and you need to be pretty good friends with them to call them by their first name. And that makes sense because Japan's a country heavily on respect and honor. Is your world the same? Giving your characters more than just a first name can do a lot of world building, but be careful because you don't want to. Ideally, in your book, you're going to have background characters. I assume at some point your characters are going to eat, and I'm also assuming they didn't single-handedly grow all the food they eat themselves. They also did not hunt all the food they eat. I'm assuming your protagonist is not a tiger. Anyway, my point is that they will interact with other people who aren't important to your story. Your story will have background characters who do not need names. It does not matter that they got the sandwich from Abigail, so don't say who the sandwich server is. If you try to give every background character in your story a name, you'll just introduce too many characters and confuse your readers. So you should just go with the shorthand of referring to people by titles. The server, the barista, the nurse, the Earth King. That's largely what I do in my book. I wrote my story in third-person omniscience, and if I have a background character my main characters don't know the name of, they don't get a name. Their uncle gets a name, the barista doesn't. And titles are just easy. Their title will be a quick and dirty way to establish who the background character is without demanding the mental energy your reader probably doesn't want to give of giving every background character a name and having your readers sort them out. So focus on your main characters and make sure their names do. Did you know Tiffany is a 14th century name? Tiffany. Meanwhile, Wendy is a relatively new name, only really gaining popularity when Peter Pan came out. And that feels so wrong. Wendy feels so much older than Tiffany. They don't fit. And finding names that do fit are important. In my story, I pulled names from a few different sources. Animals and plant names, biblical names, and Norse names. And since it was a story set in a different world, I had a lot more freedom when it came to what names I could use, since I wasn't bound by the naming conventions of a specific time in our world. But I was very careful to know where I was pulling each character's name from, so they'd emphasize my themes while making it simple for my readers to know what type of magic this person has at a glance just by their name. Before you even start Googling baby names, yes, it has to be baby names and not just names. Google will autocorrect. You should ask when and where your story takes place, what the themes are, and what is the nameless characters like. And you're writing a tomboy character? Do you want to emphasize her tomboyness by giving her a more masculine name, or juxtapose her personality against a more feminine name? Or are you writing a story with a strong anti-violence theme? If you are, you want to be very careful if you choose to give your main character the name Hunter. If done right, it's a good subversion, but if it's done wrong, it'll break immersion and make it harder for readers to connect to this character because they don't want to get to know the person because they're so busy focusing on the stupid name. but if you have started Googling, you don't want to. This is a pitfall I fell into when I first started writing my story. My world has a big royal family, and I wanted to show off their nobility and make it easier for my readers to identify the nobility by giving them end names. And that was stupid, because I ended up mixing up names and characters a lot during my rereads, and your readers will get confused if your names look too similar. You want to diversify names, start them with different letters, end them with different sounds, and make them different lengths. Because if you have characters named Taylor and Tyler, your readers will get them mixed up, and then they'll get confused and stop reading because it's too confusing keeping people with such similar names straight. So give your characters names that don't look similar. And do. This ties in with naming your pacifist character Hunter. You can do it, but you have to do it deliberately. And you should also be aware of the meanings of your characters' names. If you're not going for subversion in your pacifist story, don't use Hunter or Cain or Alexander, because those names have meanings associated with fighting. I'm not saying you should get bogged down finding the perfect name with the perfect meaning, because a lot of names have multiple meanings and a lot of names just don't have well-known meanings. But Cain does. For a lot of people, you name a character Cain and they'll make the leap to the biblical figure who killed his brother. Very much not a name reinforcing pacifism. And you can also make the meaning work for you. It's fun and a nice shortcut to look up names with specific meanings. Again, nice way to reestablish themes. Or it can say a lot about your characters, like the name Reba means fourth born. And if the character's birth order has really shaped them, that can help reinform the reader. Or if your character has a strong connection to water, you could name them Kai or Marina to reinforce that connection. What you don't want to do is... This could have been lumped in with the don't give your character similar names, but I feel like it's its own talking point because I deal in fantasy, and a lot of fantasy has strong family lineages of princes and princesses, and one thing we associate with royalty or people of certain eras is reusing names. I mean, you Google British monarchs, and there's a ton of them, but only like 7 names. Or you Google the people on the Mayflower, and there's like 70 Marys. There are times and places when names were reused a lot, but you don't get to do that in your story, even if it would make the names fit better. Because again, it will confuse the readers. They will get the characters mixed up. If you have 2 characters named John, you either need to give one of them a nickname, not Johnny. Think more like this is John, and this is John, who we call Radish, or change one of their names. Now, I'm not saying you can never reuse names, but if Radish goes by his government name, then other John can't be a real character. And do you see how confusing this is already getting? Anyway, Radish could have been named for their ancestor John, but you can't have the 2 Johns ever interact, and they can't ever really exist in the same time and place, because your characters will get them confused on which John they're following, which again breaks immersion. With that said, in the spirit of Radish, you do want to... This is a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, Radish, but on the other hand, toilet. You want to be aware of what possible nicknames there are for your characters and decide if you want to use them, who gets to refer to the characters by their nicknames, and why. It could be something everyone calls them, or it could be a sign of endearment showing off how close 2 characters are. Or it could be a sign of contempt. Does your character have a really nasty nickname they hate? It could help set up conflict between your protagonist and antagonist. And again, it can say a lot about your character. If you have a character named Samantha, it could say a lot about her if they decide to go by Sam or not. If she's a tomboy, she could choose to go by Sam to reinforce that part of herself. Or if she's more girly, she could ask people to call her Samantha. Or if she's more meek, she could let people call her Sam even if she doesn't like the name. And again, Radish. Sometimes people just get nicknames that are completely random, and that could tell us a lot about them and their backstory, or not explaining how they got their nickname could make them more mysterious. The point is, nicknames help tell us so much about your character, and they can be a way for you to have your cake with giving them a government name that fits for the time, place, and themes, but a nickname that's more them. But be aware, because you don't want to. This somewhat goes back to don't reuse names. You want character names to be distinct. For all that John and Sam are great example names, they're pretty awful names for your protagonists, because you probably know a person with those names, and so does everybody else. You want your characters, especially main characters, to have distinct names. It will help your readers remember who they are and get to know this person. And this is where you need to leave the baby name website and instead start looking up obscure names of animals, foods, plants, rocks, whatever. Just don't give them a name that everyone else has. Make the name stick out and be memorable, and you should also... I realize I'm sort of giving mixed signals here. On the one hand, give your characters a strange, obscure name that will help them stand out, but don't give them too obscure. You want them to have a name generic enough that readers will know how to pronounce it. The main point here is that you want their names to be memorable, because a name is a character's first introduction. You could write the most outgoing, awesome, energetic character ever who does and says so many memorable things with a great backstory, but none of that will matter if your readers are put off by their name. If they get the characters mixed up, if the name breaks immersion, if people think it's a stupid name, they won't invest in this character to learn to love them for who they are. So you want to walk the line. Think the difference between Sam and Samwise. We all know who Samwise is, and we all have a good idea of how to pronounce their name, but we've probably all read plenty of stories with a character named Sam and forgotten about them. Make the name easy to read and easy to say, and that will help hook your readers long enough for them to get to know your characters and love them. I'm giving you a tall order with this video. Don't reuse names, but make them fit in a time era that may only have a limited number of names. Give characters nicknames, but be mindful of their last name. Give everyone a distinct name, but not so distinct that the name is unpronounceable. I get it's a lot, and at the end of the day, if you're feeling overwhelmed, what you really want to do is go by your gut. By the time you get around to naming your characters, you'll probably already have a pretty strong impression in your mind of what's going on in your story and who the nameless character is. You might even have an idea for what their name should be, and you should lean into that. When I name my characters, a lot of times I'll have an idea for what letter their name starts with, and even just that is so incredibly helpful. It narrows down the names and finding the perfect one. And a lot of times when I've tried to give my characters a name with a different first letter, I end up fighting myself because the name doesn't fit. You will have a much easier time finding a name you like if you lean into your instincts. And don't overthink it, trying to find the perfect name with the perfect meaning, with the perfect reflection for where and when your story takes place. So listen to your instincts.
I only have animal instincts.
And there you have it, some do's and don'ts to naming your characters. There's a lot that goes into it, but there's also a lot that goes into planning and writing. If you've made it this far, stop stressing and don't be afraid of placeholder names. And most importantly, don't forget to go out and find inspiration, be it by Googling baby names, stealing names from people you know, or from books. So don't forget to go out and read and write.